You're listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Today in Manufacturing podcast. With me this week are Jeff Ranke and Anna Wells. We each have more than 15 years of experience covering the manufacturing industry. Every week, we take the 5 most popular stories on our websites and discuss the implications they have on the industry going forward. Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Jeff, David, or Anna at in.com with email the podcast in the subject line. Please make sure to subscribe to our daily and weekly newsletters so you get the podcast to your inbox first. We're also live every Friday or Thursday or sometime within the week on YouTube, so subscribe to us on YouTube at IEN Magazine, and you'll get a notification when we go live. Anna, how you doing this week?
Great. How
Jeff?
are you?
Let her finish, David.
I thought I was getting like a good great, and then that's it. Roll.
How are you?
Great. Jeff, what's going on?
I'm good, David. I'm ready to go. Ready to get up on my soapbox. There is plenty of stories in this episode that really ground my gears.
Oh, Jeff
Teaser.
brought a box of soap.
No foreshadowing there.
All right, everyone,
Buckle
steal
up.
yourselves. But before we get started, we have a word from our sponsor.
Oil Eater's household cleaners, industrial cleaners, and industrial equipment are specifically designed to replace dangerous solvents and are used throughout the world. Our safe water-based formula dissolves grease and grime for almost any surface and leaves a fresh, non-chemical scent. Our ultra-concentrated formulas are perfect for light, medium, or heavy cleaning and can be used on shop floors, in parts washers, to clean equipment, and more. VOC compliant, Oil Eater will do an excellent job in a multitude of applications, safely and cost-effectively, while reducing your chemical usage. Safe for the user, safe for the surfaces being cleaned, and safe for the environment. For more information, visit oileater.com or call 800-528-0334.
And we're back. And before we get rolling with our first story, just a reminder that if you want to get a free sample of Oil Eater, you can click the link in the live chat, or you can check it out in the link below. Our first story this week: ExxonMobil ordered to reinstate workers accused of leaking information. In late 2020, ExxonMobil fired a pair of computational scientists suspected of leaking information to the Wall Street Journal. Now, OSHA says the company's actions were illegal and ordered Exxon to reinstate the workers and pay them more than $800,000 in back wages, interest, and damages. The Wall Street Journal article says Exxon inflated production estimates and the value of oil and gas wells in the Texas Permian Basin. The article also shed light on a possible inaccuracy regarding Exxon's claim from a 2019 SEC filing that drilling speed would increase over 5 years. The scientists weren't named as sources in the article. However, the OSHA whistleblower investigation found that Exxon knew one of the scientists was a relative of a source the Wall Street Journal article used. ExxonMobil fired the scientist for mishandling proprietary company information, having a, quote, negative attitude, losing management's confidence, and looking for other jobs. Jeff, was this some sort of retribution or retaliation, or are they just looking to get rid of some bad apples?
Wow, bad apples. Interesting, another great PR week, or not so much for Exxon. Last week we talked about them having, was it a $35 million basically fine, or having to pay some back wages to some folks based on an NLRB settlement. And now here we're talking about another $800,000 for back pay for some of these white collar workers that they wanted to get rid of. It's interesting when you look at the situation, because after this article came out in the Wall Street Journal, they did see a drop in about 5% off of their stock prices. So there was an immediate impact here. Again, kind of looking back, this is the start of 2021. There was a lot of economic uncertainty. Exxon was coming off a year when they saw profits cut in half. So you can understand why they may have been super guarded. I'm not justifying the fact that they were kind of going after these folks for expressing opinions. But when you look at it in the context of that timing, you can appreciate maybe some of the resistance to seeing those comments out there, and then obviously the dramatic impact in impacting their stock price so quickly. Saw an HR dive. They were actually able to get some comments from ExxonMobil. Casey Norton was quoted as saying, "As we have said, the claims about drilling rates are demonstratively false. The speed the employees claimed was impossible, was not only possible, but we achieved that speed 3 years ahead of the plan they questioned. It turns out the employees were not qualified enough to offer an opinion, let alone make a credible complaint." So Exxon is doubling down on this. They're appealing this judgment, this ruling. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The other thing that's come into play is with the SEC filing that resulted from this article as well. It's still sort of ongoing, but recently a private suit that was brought against some people at Exxon for potentially misleading stockholders was thrown out. So there is some momentum here in terms of Exxon being somewhat justified maybe in firing these people for cause, at least on paper. You could see that they could validate the fact that these folks made some false claims, funneled that into a public forum that impacted the overall performance of the company from a financial perspective. So they do have some legs to this. That said, it's a terrible look going after these folks like this. And if you're like going this way, do you really want to come back? I mean, are you just looking for the money?
No, that is my exact point in this whole thing. And I actually had some of the same quotes pulled out because what happens when employees are ordered reinstated? Yeah. Like, not only it's like, oh man, you're going to get your job back. And then you see this comment from an Exxon spokesperson that basically says, oh, you were too dumb to even say anything correctly anyways. The door is clearly not open for you. You know, like you're not coming back with open arms. I'm just curious. I was trying to look into it a little bit more and I didn't see a lot out there, but Anna, it has to be a difficult situation when the company is ordered to bring you back in and you are clearly not wanted anymore.
Well, it's also hard to know, though, you know, at the local level, how this played out versus a corporate entity like picking these people out and deciding that they need to go. But anyway, I can't speak to that, I guess. I would say to Jeff's point, you can see how it was not a good situation for Exxon and how they wanted to fire these employees. I think their cause felt a little bit gray. I know that this HR person is like speaking directly as if these folks gave this information to the Wall Street Journal, but I don't think that was really proven. I think that was assumed because they were not quoted within the article. They were found to be adjacent to this person who was quoted within the article.
Yeah. It's just really suspicious.
It's suspicious. It was likely a very easy process of elimination for them. But in the end, was it proven or was it just a very strong assumption? I don't know. As for the, so I think the one computational scientist was fired for leaking the information. The other one, they said, for negative attitude, looking for other jobs.
That seems like a reasonable, you know, he obviously doesn't want to be here anyways. So I feel like we both got what we wanted here.
Yeah, but I mean, like, how lame is this as a defense? Losing the confidence of company management. That is like the most generic, like. Oh
no, that's a day one like HR thing that they put on a form. Like when you lose management's confidence, that's like a fireable offense.
Okay, but would you want me on this podcast if I came out publicly and said, we really don't know what we're talking about? I don't know why people would want to listen to this. We're not really sure on what we're doing. Because that's essentially what this guy said.
Jeff, you lose my confidence on a daily basis. I've never, ever once.
Gloves are off.
I was strictly going to offer it in a hypothetical sense, Jeff.
Here's what I think. I think that a lot of these companies have operated so long under this at-will, right-to-work environment, these laws that protect them in many cases from, you know, for firing people for whatever they want, right? There are a lot of exceptions to those laws that I think the companies know about and the employees don't. And so it leads these companies to roll the dice on some of this stuff when maybe they don't have the legal backing to do so. And when you're Exxon and you have deep pockets and you have a strong legal team, I can see why people get fired unjustly and then don't do anything about it, and Exxon gets away with it. In this case, that's not what happened. In this case, you know, the Justice Department pursued some charges here. You know, but if it's just some person, maybe they're thinking, I can't afford to go up against Exxon. I don't know what happens next. They can fire me for any reason, I think, because I think that's what people think about these laws, right? So to me, it was sort of like a little shady if you look at the reasoning. And, obviously they were protected by this whistleblower thing. I don't know.
Well, it wasn't the whistleblower thing that really protected him, because I thought the same thing. I thought that, they were essentially fired with cause, but it goes to this like Sarbanes-Oxley Act.
Oh, right.
That's where they were kind of protected, which was passed in 2002 as a means of improving auditing and public disclosures in response to several accounting scandals that happened in the early 2000s, like Enron.
Okay, so that makes even more sense then and justifies, I think, my point, which is that they do not have evidence that these people made those statements because they would be protected under the whistleblower component of the defense of those right to work laws.
True.
So, and if that was not brought up, this other defense was used, then I don't know. I don't think that they were justly fired. But I get it. I mean, do you want that job back? Probably not, but I would take that $400,000 or whatever.
Right, the back pay, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it should have been up to them if they wanted to leave versus being fired. I get that dynamic, but the other part of it is these individuals haven't said they didn't offer this information. That isn't really what's in question here. It's more of, did Exxon have the right to fire them based on their belief that they submitted this information?
Right, and they don't.
Okay, that's one thing, but again, I don't know. I mean, I can appreciate where Exxon is coming from. Not that I think it was a good tactic or a best practice. But again, if somebody is saying their methodology is wrong here, I don't believe that they can actually accomplish what they're saying they can accomplish, that does offer some justification in the fact that they don't have faith in the company's leadership.
Sure, but sorry, one more thing, and then I will get out of your way. But you have to look at what a slippery slope that is to allow managers to say stuff like, I just have a bad feeling about this person. If you look at all of the, stereotypes and preconceptions and all the stuff that takes place in the workplace and people that are harmed by other people's preconceptions or conceptions about them, that's kind of a scary position to be in, to think that your manager can just decide. I don't have confidence in you. How do you put any structure around that?
The difference is having that as an internal conversation versus going to the Wall Street Journal.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't have proof. But they don't have proof that they did that.
Yeah, I think, Anna, this is actually an example of something that happens every day.
I know
people are fired for that every day.
Right, and I get that, and people don't go back in and try to they don't understand what is exempt of them if they're being harassed or if they're being picked on for their gender or race or age or whatever. I mean, that stuff is protected under even right to work state laws.
Yeah.
But it's so nebulous that it's really hard for people to, with this stuff, you get away with this stuff, and then it's hard to push back on it.
Well, I think people do push back on it. It's just not something that makes the news cycle because it happens people are fired without cause every day. They pursue, trying to figure out whether or not they should get paid for unemployment. They do, file against the company to try and get money back or feel that they were wrongfully terminated. It's just not something that we hear about every day. This we heard about because it's Exxon. It's $800,000. This happens every day where people contest their firing. They get $2,500 or something maybe, and the company is likely still happy to have them gone.
This is also different because it did have an impact financially.
True, yeah.
When the SEC starts launching an investigation, that puts it in a different perspective as well. And that's where the whistleblower part comes in.
Yeah. All right. Our next most popular story. Amazon shuts down autonomous delivery robots. Scout is out. Amazon is killing its autonomous delivery robot pilot program. The idea was that these small 6-wheel robots would autonomously drive to homes and let customers retrieve packages from its secured compartment. The company plans to keep a small team working on delivery robots, but Scout's dead, and the 400 people who are working on the project will be offered jobs elsewhere within Amazon. The company started out with 6 Scout robots that were making deliveries Monday through Friday during daylight hours in Washington state. And the company is going to maintain a small team that is still going to work on these autonomous delivery robots. Jeff, are you sorry to see Scout go?
No, but I bet you are. This is part of the robotic overlord infrastructure that you are depending on to like bring you your lunch or your whatever subsistence they're going to allow for you on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Scout was David's best friend.
I mean, I like the idea, actually, and we'll get into it more. I like the idea of delivery drones more. Scout logistically just doesn't work because they only want to deliver, and I know it's only for the test, but they only want to deliver during daylight hours, and you need to be there to retrieve the package from Scout, and that just doesn't work.
Not always. Am I understanding this right? That essentially they would have like a garage for all of these Scout vehicles?
Like a warehouse. The right term? They would be deployed from a warehouse.
So, but it would have to be relatively close because it's not like you can't go across the highway with these things or anything. So you'd have to have like a hub relatively close to like the final destinations because they go like 6 miles an hour or something on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
This just seems the infrastructure that this was proposing to use just seems so challenging. From a logistical perspective, I just don't know. I understand that this was supposed to be a thing that led to the thing, but it definitely did not because I don't understand how the logistics of this were going to advance to a point where it would work on a greater scale, I guess. So.
I see how companies are trying to get more and more regional warehouse hubs. And so I understand the idea of like a small hub with, maybe the top 1,000 popular items in that area. And these scouts could just go into the hub, be autonomously loaded and deployed. I understand the idea behind it. I just think logistically, this doesn't work that way. And which was proven, basically they said, we got a lot of feedback from people and we're going to kill it. Mm-hmm. Anna, your thoughts on Scout?
I mean, I think that it's not necessarily dead. I mean, I think they're doing the right thing. I think they're abandoning the test part of it. They're keeping some designers on probably to go back to the drawing board and continue to look at how to make this work over time. I don't think that's the worst thing. Tech companies tend to try to shove things down our throats sometimes before we're ready. I know we talked earlier about the Meta VR headset that they're trying to promote for business applications, and there aren't really any business applications for it. And some things the public, consumers are just not ready for. They're just not interested in. And I think you guys raised a few points about why not with this particular robot. It's not that convenient. It doesn't come to your door. It doesn't come to your door when you're not home, which I think is like the only way that I would survive getting packages delivered is not having to meet them somewhere. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't necessarily make sense right now. I think there's other issues too that Amazon's encountered in terms of like privacy and people maybe not being fans of these little robots driving through their communities with cameras on the top. We've seen Amazon get completely blasted for sharing footage from Ring doorbells before. I don't think this is that different in terms of what kind of footage it can capture. Mm-hmm. And we know that Amazon is open to doing that. And that's really rubbed the public the wrong way in many cases. So I don't know. I mean, right now, too, these being unmanned ground level devices and they're not everywhere, so people aren't used to them. They're probably getting beat up a little bit. I'm guessing they're more subject to theft, to damage, to...
No, they were, where they were deployed, they were accompanied by... They basically had...
For the test.
Yeah. For the test. Yeah. But yes, in reality is my point. Like,
gotcha.
I can't imagine that. So Amazon says that they have measures in place to prevent that.
Yeah, they can't even get people to return the rental bikes.
I know. People won't even put a shopping cart back. Like, you think that a kid on a bike isn't going to kick this thing over? Mm-hmm. I think they need to come up with something that's a little bit more realistic. And of course, there's a big demand in this last mile thing. Last mile is the most expensive, the most time consuming, the most challenging from a routing perspective for these companies. If they could take the humans out of it, that takes a lot of cost out of it for them. But we're just not there yet.
Another part of this is that Amazon is actually starting to wind down experimental projects because sales are slowing and they're kind of pulling back a little bit. The project ended because it wasn't meeting customer needs. And my thought was, most of the time, this is how R&D ends. The idea just doesn't work out. There's no thing after this thing. It dies. But I mean, with how quickly the economy has turned, Amazon was still, just a few months ago, it was still holding meet and greets in communities that were testing these devices. Mm-hmm. So this was not something that I think the team really saw coming. That all of a sudden Amazon saw the economy shifting and really had to kind of scale back, and Scout was one of them that had to go. How do you guys feel about drone deliveries? Because drone deliveries, unlike Scout, that's where the drone flies over and just drops it via parachute in your backyard. How do you feel about that?
I just saw this really interesting news story a few weeks back about a drone food delivery in Australia that went horribly awry. And the drone, I think, hit a power line and just incinerated. But not before dropping the food to the ground where when they found it, it was still hot.
Oh, that's good.
So don't worry about it.
Someone got the Vegemite.
Yep.
Well, we've seen this down at the University of Wisconsin, right? A lot of those like they look like this. The wheeled autonomous
Little
robots
squares.
for food delivery. That seems to work
Yep.
down there. I haven't seen a ton of them lately, but from time to time, definitely see them cruising around.
Yeah, food delivery makes more sense to me though, because that's something where you want it now, you're willing to meet it at the door. You know, whereas where I think of how I use Amazon, I order it and I know it's going to show up at some point and I'll just retrieve it at my leisure. Yeah. So food service, I definitely see it.
Yeah, the drone, I don't know. There's something that makes me uneasy about that. I can't even pinpoint why. It's just something about a drone dropping something in my front yard. I don't know. It's that's a definite, I think, more of a mental sort of paradigm shift that you'd have to get used to.
Yeah.
And if it started working and everybody started doing it, maybe you start feeling more comfortable. On the onset, that's tough for me personally to be an early adopter for. So
yeah, on the it makes sense to me if it's delivering medicine, medical supplies, stuff like that.
Emergency stuff.
But I don't. Yeah, I just ordered, like 100 LR44 little coin cell batteries, and I just, I don't need those right now.
Could you imagine?
Well, because it was like it cost the same to buy 100 of them as it did 6. So I'm like, all right, we're gonna power all the laser pointers.
Now, the other thing that I can appreciate with like a lot of this last mile focus is the fact that they're trying to reduce emissions and things like that. And you can definitely see starting and stopping a van, all of that. Yeah, that's wear and tear. That's real cost. That's environmental elements. So in that vein, I would try to get used to something like that, but yeah, still a little creepy.
Get out of here, you creepy little scout. All right. Our next most popular story. Rancher gets 11 years in ghost cattle scheme. Cody Allen Easterday, the ghost cattle rancher, was sentenced to more than 10 years in prison for defrauding Tyson Foods and another unnamed company. Easterday signed a deal with the companies to raise cattle on their behalf. He was paid to raise more than 265,000 cattle over 5 years, but the cattle never existed. Instead, the ghost cattle rancher used the proceeds to cover some $200 million in losses from commodities trading. The 51-year-old pleaded guilty to wire fraud last spring and agreed to pay more than $244 million in restitution. Anna, we've covered the ghost cattle rancher before. Were you surprised to see that he's going away for more than a decade?
I don't know about the sentence. That's tough. That's a really long sentence, but at the same time, like what he did was pretty egregious and prolonged. So obviously there was a chance for him to turn things around and he didn't.
To buy cows at any point?
At any point, buy the cows.
5-year process?
Buy the cows.
Yeah.
And you almost
easy out.
You almost feel bad for this bonehead for like a hot second when you think about like, so he spent pretty much all of his money on covering for bad trades that he had made in the commodities market, which is like, dude, you didn't even get like a Ferrari out of this or anything, like a European river cruise.
Said
like
other personal expenses.
So, so you think that he at least like bought a fur coat or something?
Like maybe a Hyundai. Like
not that I would do that, but
no, he probably bought like an F-150. He's a rancher. I mean,
really nice one.
Yeah, but it's like they don't make the headlines until it's a Lambo. We're just like, what is this dude doing driving up to the cattle ranch in a Lambo?
Yeah.
Maybe give him some credit as opposed to some of these other people that have been in these like fraud schemes where he didn't do something so obvious and egregious that brought more attention to himself. So maybe that helped him stick around, keep doing this for too long.
I guess, but I don't feel like it was on purpose. I think.
Do you think like when Tyson called to like check in on the cattle, he would just hold the phone outside and he had one of those cans that made the mooing sound and he'd just tip it over like, yep, they're happy out there.
That's them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks
You're
for the feed.
looking for cows. I got them. Well, gotta go. So I know you mentioned some implications in the food market, and it's like it's difficult to see how this probably impacted pricing for for consumers when there's this massive fraud going on. This should never have happened. Tyson is a victim in this case, obviously, but at the same time, I take a little bit of issue with Tyson
Well, because they didn't send somebody
in general.
Like, they didn't have some sort of what is it, like an adjuster, like an auditor that came up just like, hey, could you go out there, see if they're real?
Right, how it was handled. And then you wonder if it happened in this case, how widespread is this practice of just sort of like letting things run on their own, self-policing?
Yeah,
we trust you, like the honor system about these cows. And then if they never show up, we'll figure it out in 5 to 6 years' time. Like, that's pretty bad. And I'd like to add, too, that Tyson has been involved in a lot of litigation in the last few years. They were accused of price fixing a few times. They cooperated with the U.S. government on a chicken price fixing situation in order to avoid criminal prosecution. They were not alone. There was a lot of other industry peers that were also involved in that. You saw price fixing allegations hit the tuna industry in the last few years. Mm-hmm. Some of their executives actually got jail time. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, I think, a little bit later. We have a story about Smithfield that we'll get to, but you have all these companies in the meat industry who say that they can't afford to profitably operate when they're handed down these types of regulations that are made in defense of maybe animal welfare, chickens that have room to move, pigs that have room to move. And it just makes me wonder how like their cost centers would change, or maybe how food product pricing would change if these companies weren't paying hundreds of millions of dollars in settlement costs, millions in legal fees, letting a ghost cattle scheme run unfettered for like 5 years. That is a lot of wasted money that could be spent on their actual operations. And then meanwhile, we have these companies that are like, we can't afford to pay our workers more. We can't afford to, operate a farm that makes it at least not a miserable life for this animal that we're going to slaughter. Mm-hmm. I would like to see the money there, not just wrapped up in all this. I almost used the word embroiled.
Embroiled? Because
I feel like that's
oh, yeah. A lot of things are embroiled here.
Embroiled, yes. A lot of meat embroiled in these scandals. But it would be better, I think, if we were a little bit more diligent in our operations and they just tried to be above board. Or I don't know. This should have been caught earlier.
No, I agree. Jeff, you always talk about the slim margins in the food manufacturing and or food processing industry. But Anna raises some good points about how maybe if they ran their operation just a little bit cleaner, maybe margins wouldn't be so thin.
Well, not to fly a conspiracy flag here, but yes. The fact that this went on this long for this amount of money, and it wasn't discovered until there was an internal audit at Tyson, it kind of makes you feel like somebody else knew what was going on here.
It does.
Internally.
Someone's getting a little kickback.
Yeah, all along the way. I mean, everybody had to be aware of this. We talk about in the foods industry, particular, the need for traceability and accountability and all that, and people want to know more about what's going on their plate. Well, in this instance, it's not even about quality. It's just about accountability.
Yeah.
Actually knowing what's going on, and to your point, Anna, where everything is going. I think part of the reasons that this could have been overlooked internally by Tyson, not to justify or give them an out in any way, shape, or form, but this is a big operation. Yeah. Easter Day Ranches and Farms, this is a $250 million company, over 150 employees, 22,000 acres of farmland. I mean, it's a big entity that was successful for decades, which brings you back to this individual. What is wrong with this guy? Mm-hmm. I mean, is there some sort of almost like sociopathic dynamic here where he did not think he was going to get caught? Is it almost like is it a disease? Like, sometimes gamblers are like, I'll hit the next one. I'm just going to keep going. And I can make up for it this way, until he eventually got caught. I think there is a definite detachment from reality here. I think this individual has some issues. He's still claiming Tyson owes him over $60 million. He said they owe him $12 million for feed.
Oh.
For cows he never bought.
Feed.
Yeah.
And another $40 million he says he's owed for other expenses that came with running his ranch and farm that Tyson never gave him. I mean, obviously, there's something wrong here with this guy. Even if you even have the balls to stand up in court and make that argument. Yeah. I mean, come on. Take your lumps and go away. And the real tragedy here, again, is this business obviously had to declare bankruptcy. There's nothing left there. 150 people are out of work.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about Easter Day before in numerous cases because he's made news all over the industry. when you talk about traceability and accountability, Jeff, some industries like the cannabis industry, they track it seed to the final product. I mean, are we going to get to a point where, let's use the cattle industry, for example, where every animal is chipped and you can trace the entire life of that product from the animal's treatment on the farm to your plate?
It's being done already.
Yeah.
In a lot of places that is being done already. But what it really comes down to in the food industry is unique because you do have entities like the FDA who have a lot of regulations and a lot of oversight and are involved very thoroughly. But we've also run stories about how they don't have enough inspectors to get around looking at everything. So a lot of it comes down to, and if you talk to any food processors, a lot of the more stricter auditing or compliance issues come from their suppliers. So in this instance, it would be anticipated that Tyson would have more potential oversight with dealing with this ranch and this farm than any FDA or government inspector would be. And I think that's good and bad. It's good because there is another level of accountability, but it's bad because if that company like Tyson decides that they're just going to trust this guy, then all that accountability goes out the window.
Yeah.
And again, if he was losing $200 million on commodities, he probably wasn't investing in traceability software that he should have been.
Well, and there's a lot we don't know. We don't know if he had, such a good track record with those companies that maybe at this point, maybe they had a relationship where they didn't feel like they needed to. Anna, you had mentioned the incredible disruption to the food supply chain. And also this case, when it first was uncovered, it hasn't stopped him from trying to succeed or try other scams. Reeve covered on the podcast, I believe, when he bought that Lost Valley Farm in Boardman, Oregon for $66.7 million in 2019. It was that dairy farm that was supposed to be huge in the state. It was, tens of millions, $100 million facility, or could have been a $100 million facility with hundreds of jobs. And it just never panned out. And there was all that. And as a result, he wound up suing the previous owners. There were fights with the local government. He just also seems like a very litigious man to me. Where, I get it. You got to kind of fight back when people are coming at you. But at some point when you're never the problem, when it's always somebody else's fault, you got to kind of look in the mirror. And he's going to have 11 years to do that. I don't know. And Jeff, to your point, I can't tell if he's a bad actor or just someone who got lost in the hustle.
He's a bad actor.
If it wasn't the dollar amount, I could see how he's like, all right, I just got to cover these commodities losses. And then, I only need 265,000 cattle. So if I just buy 5,000 a month, maybe he could get back in it. I don't know.
He had to lie to himself for 10 years. Come on.
Yeah. You're just that was a good disappointed dad voice right there.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Not mad.
Cody, Jeff's just disappointed.
I am highly disappointed.
All right. Our next most popular story, the Smithfield story Anna was talking about. Activists acquitted in Smithfield pig scandal. Heist. It was a heist, not a scandal. Lost a word there. In 2017, two members of the Direct Action Everywhere animal rights group were investigating pig living conditions at Circle 4 Farms, a Utah-based factory farm that's owned by Smithfield Foods. While on site, Wayne Shun and Paul Picklesheimer witnessed two newborn piglets that they determined to be sick and dangerously underweight. They took the piglets, brought them into veterinary care, and transferred them to an animal sanctuary. When the incident was discovered, the two men were charged with felony burglary and theft and were facing up to 5.5 years in prison, pending the results of their trial. Well, a jury has unanimously agreed that the two men should be acquitted for their actions. Legal experts say this could lay the groundwork for a legal, quote, right to rescue. DXE was at the facility to see if Smithfield had stopped using highly criticized gestation crates that were too small for pregnant pigs to turn around in. The activists say that they not only found these gestation crates, but also saw dead and sick piglets. The verdict was surprising because it took place in a region that relies heavily on corporations like Smithfield for jobs. Lily and Lizzie, the piglets that were rescued, are alive and well and living at the same animal sanctuary where they were originally sent after the ordeal. Anna, I know that this was your story this week. What were your thoughts on how all of this kind of shook out regarding a right to rescue?
Yeah, the story caught my attention because there's a lot of details that were very insane and interesting that we weren't even able to include in the story because there's just so much there. I think one of the most interesting aspects was that nearly everyone, including the defendants, thought that this was going to go the other way. Smithfield probably felt that this was an absolute lock. You can see why they would think that. Their property was taken.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the reasons too that they thought that everyone thought this would go the other way was that certain parts of the trial slanted heavily in favor of the prosecution. The case was criticized by legal scholars as being unconstitutional, politically motivated. The trial had to be moved from the county where it took place to a neighboring county after the activists were facing threats of violence from authorities, intimidation from authorities. It prompted a civil rights lawsuit. Secondly, the judge in the case ruled that the jury couldn't see any video of the rescue or any evidence of the condition of the animals because it might arouse their horror, which is like very hard to understand also. So it really felt like a kind of a watershed moment when they did, where they emerged victorious and were acquitted in this case. The defendant, Wayne Schwinn, founded the group. He's a former law professor, and he actually defended himself with some pretty impassioned and impressive arguments. But one of the defense witnesses was actually the owner of a turkey farm that had been investigated by this group before.
Oh.
And he
was a defense witness?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They struck up a friendship. He was asked if their actions caused him harm, and he said there's a difference between stealing a turkey and rescuing a turkey who is suffering. So definitely there was sort of this underdog feel, I think, that they prevailed there almost in a way that writes like a movie script. I mean, it was just all this stuff together was like, whoa. I guess after all that, on a personal level, I can appreciate this right to rescue. As you know, I believe that the legal system should support the intervention of individuals on behalf of someone who's, facing abject suffering. When it's an animal, I think you can argue that it's a very slippery slope as to how we now define suffering in the context of a factory farm. But to that, I would say, not knowing what happens next, Smithfield kind of asked for this. They could have not pressed charges, but they did. And that was how this trial occurred and established this precedent that is now going to come back and bite them in the future potentially. So unfortunately for Smithfield, they played their hand and they kind of lost there.
Yeah. I agree with you that the slippery slope part of trying to determine when you have the right to rescue. But I mean, depending on the footage that they took from this facility, it sounded like maybe that in this particular situation that there were some really bad things being done to animals there.
I think so. And I think that you're going to have people be very, very cautious about doing this because, again, the corporation has the deepest pockets. You would have to be able to prove that what you were doing was to save the life of this animal. That may be difficult to prove. And so if you don't want to go up against this corporation again in a legal system where you're the underdog, it could easily go the other way next time. I don't know. I don't know that it's going to cause like this groundswell of this situation occurring any more than it already does, right?
Yeah. And this, you're right, this Xiong guy, Wayne Xiong, he's a very impressive guy. He's been doing these sort of investigations going into facilities and for more than 15 years now. So he was, he knew what he was doing. Jeff, what are your thoughts as to what took place at Smithfield?
So first of all, I think these individuals were fortunate that this was a jury trial and not a judge making the ruling.
Oh, true.
Because in my opinion, it's pretty black and white. Animals are property. Property was stolen. Now, in this instance, I can appreciate that there was I guess you could call it borderline, or it wasn't maybe even borderline. It was animal abuse, what was going on here at this facility. Nonetheless, that was their property. Now, if common sense were to take place here, which is where I get so frustrated with some of these cases, okay? Because common sense says Smithfield doesn't prosecute these guys. It says, okay, you took these pigs. The pigs are healthy now. The pigs are ours.
Yeah.
We get them back. We'll pay the medical bills. We'll do whatever, but those are ours. They should get them back. I understand they're at a preserve and all that kind of stuff, and pigs are healthy and doing great. By the letter of the law, they still belong to that company.
Yeah, because by the law, it's like if you stole somebody's, derelict car out of their, yard.
You can agree or disagree with that, and that's sort of a personal, ethical situation. But again, I think if this was a judge making this decision, it could have gone the other way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where I get really frustrated and where I will get up on my soapbox a little bit with these situations is this isn't necessarily a Smithfield issue. It is and it isn't. It's this facility.
Yeah,
okay. These facilities and these different factory farms have different operating procedures. You grew up in an agricultural community. Anna, so did you. I grew up very closely to a lot of farms. If you actually care about your farm as a business, you don't treat these animals as just another piece of equipment. Mm-hmm. Yes, they're there for a reason. Okay. Mm-hmm. They have an end game. There is a purpose that you are raising these animals. But during that time, you take care of them. Mm-hmm. These gestational crates that they're talking about in this facility, they're not allowed. They're not legal in any developed country in the world, except some states here in the U.S.
Yeah,
there is so much that has come along in terms of positive progress in our food processing industry. So many good things that have happened, but we've got some people who cling to these old school ways of doing things, and they need to adapt and move on. Yeah. This isn't acceptable anymore. People their eyes are opened. They're more understanding and they're more aware of things that are going on from farm to table, and they're going to make purchasing decisions based on how you run your company. Mm-hmm. And if Smithfield wants to get away from this type of image, they need to be more aware of what's going on at each individual factory farm facility.
Yeah.
That's where it starts. Mm-hmm. This isn't the FDA. This isn't OSHA. This isn't even up to these individuals going in and rescuing these animals. It's up to these individuals running these facilities to get with the times and understand the right way of doing business. Because if even from a more practical or pragmatic perspective, if you're losing product because it's not surviving to get to the marketplace, you're losing money.
Yeah.
So be smarter. Okay. I understand that these are products and that they have, again, they're going to end up in the grocery store. Okay. Yeah. That's the end game. But the process of getting them there, you can be a lot smarter, a lot more efficient, and you can do things the right way without losing money.
Yeah.
And that's what's just so frustrating here, because then the whole industry gets lumped together with people doing things the wrong way. And that is not fair.
Yeah. No, I agree. And no one's going to know Circle 4 Farms other than people really close to it. But people are going to know Smithfield, and they're going to know that when they're making their decisions at the grocery store. And like we talked about in the last story, I think it's on Smithfield that they have to police these facilities. They have to have some accountability and police kind of these facilities, just because they have to know that their reputation and money is on the line.
Well, and here's where other entities within the food manufacturing community can also play a role. If you're a food service buyer, you can also conduct audits on where you're buying your stuff from. Okay, I understand if you are working for a school district or you're a NASCO type food distributor and you're buying in huge bulk, you can still hold all these people accountable to the way that they're going about supplying product to you.
Yeah,
that's where it can start as well. Bigger grocery stores are already doing it. You can already see them being more aware and doing that whole, like we were talking about the traceability and being able to track things. I know Anna loves talking about blockchain and all that type of technology that can come into play. But here in the food industry, it can have a real positive impact if people grab onto it, because it's an unadulterated record of where everything has been and what has happened to it.
Yeah.
Again, get with the times.
Yeah. That is not uncommon in some industries where there is a QR code on the packaging and you can scan that QR code and it tells you everything about what happened to the creation of that product. During the trial, Wayne Shun told the jury that it had the right, that if the right to rescue were established, quote, companies will be a little more compassionate to creatures under their stewardship. Governments will be a little bit more open to animal cruelty complaints. And maybe, just maybe, a baby pig like Lily won't have to starve to death on the floor of a factory farm. I still thought that's a strong maybe. Yeah.
No, I'd agree.
That seemed overly optimistic, but I think that a decision was made here that could create some real positive change in the industry.
Well, sorry, not to continue on with this, but the other part of this is by finding these guys that they were okay to do this, that they're allowed to do this, you also open up doors to some people who are a little bit more radical when it comes to animal rights and potentially creating issues for people who are doing it the right way, which is also kind of scary.
No, I thought the same thing when I was reading this article, is that people are going to use that right to rescue and get real, like in situations when it might not be necessary. I mean, whenever it is necessary, that's good. Do it. You know, the monkeys that are picking the coconuts, get out there right to rescue those monkeys. But I agree that it could cause some problems. I also would just like to reiterate that you can make choices that change the industry when you are shopping or how you do procure meat, or even if you don't eat it. You know, I have said it multiple times on this podcast where I have relationships with the specific farms where our food comes from. Not all of it. You know, sometimes I buy, you know, a frozen pizza with meat on it, and I don't know how that came to, you know, how that was created. But, you know, when I buy like an entire cow or pig or a lot of chickens at the time, and I know the farms are coming from and they're doing it right. And that is an option for people. It takes a little bit more doing, but, you know, I feel better about it.
Yeah.
All right. Our next most popular story. GM owes $100 million after jury finds it hid defect. Just one day after GM unveiled its third quarter earnings and saved and sales that were up 24%, the law firm DeCello Levitt issued a press release revealing a massive judgment against the automaker. A trial verdict was handed down after a class action lawsuit alleged that GM concealed a defect in the engines in some of its SUVs and light trucks. The allegations suggest that GM's Generation 4 Vortec 5300 LC9 engine featured a, quote, defect in the engine's piston rings that resulted in the vehicles consuming too much oil. The lawsuit claims that GM was alerted, quote, quickly to the issues, that the excess oil was infiltrating engine parts and causing premature breakdowns. The suit adds that GM offered ineffective solutions and design changes over several years before discontinuing the engine. The jury in the case determined that GM violated consumer protection regulations and forced the automaker to pay $2,700 to the class action suit's 38,000 plaintiffs. Anna, that's $102.6 million. Your thoughts on GM's penalty for past defects?
You know, I thought a lot about this, and I don't think this is so much about this individual engine, though we did get a few comments from our readers who were angry about the payout in comparison to what it would cost to actually rebuild an engine. And to that, I would say I feel you, but like the newest of the vehicles that we're discussing here was close to a decade old. So keep that in mind, I guess. To me, the issue is more about GM's culture of cover-ups. We've seen litigation and bad press over the years where GM's been accused of covering up flaws, like with the ignition switches. We saw a steering wheel sensor issue. GM seems to have rolled the dice here, as class action lawsuits tend to be a bit of a crapshoot. And in hindsight, it seems like maybe they would have been better off settling. Because this gets a lot more attention, I think, when it's a judgment, and it brings them, you know, back up in people's minds. Even though this took place many years ago, I think 2010 is when they discontinued this engine. It still brings up that theme of GM having this culture that conceals defects. And I think weirdly, the one thing that GM has going for it is that it is in the automotive industry where everyone conceals defects. Automakers do it. The component suppliers do it. It's one way of avoiding costly recalls, I guess. So they don't exactly stand on an island there. But I do think that as all these new automakers are coming to the market, like the Rivians and the Lucids and stuff, it makes it easier, in my opinion, as a consumer to say, maybe I'll give those guys a shot. Because it's not like you're dealing with this group of established automakers that have this glittering track record that you never have quality issues with. It just almost breaks the veneer of this established automaker thing and makes you think like, you know, maybe these new ones are worth a shot. I don't know. It's not like you know what you're going to get when you deal with a GM, or, you know, to me, it makes them look corrupt. It does not instill confidence that these legacy automakers are any better than anybody else. Even these new kids on the block, you know, why not give them a chance if this is what you're going to get from a GM, you know? No, agreed. I mean, and I don't know if you mentioned VW, but the same thing where like that stain of the emissions scandal. For so long they did that, you know, and you just see that they assume that they can try to write it out and avoid the tremendous recall costs, but in the end, it's worse.
No, it's and I know that you're talking about 10-year-old. Like what is it? A Chevy Avalanche, Silverado 1500, Suburban, GMC Sierra, and the GMC Yukon XL. But still, I mean, we've all had to have our cars into the shop, over the last couple of months, and $2,700 is not going to go a long way to
not these
anything.
days. That's true.
So I don't know. That's one thing that I always think about is you see $100+ million settlement, and Jeff, really what it comes down to is not a lot of money for the people who kind of suffered as a result of this defect.
Yeah, just to put it in perspective, $2,700. If we're looking at a Suburban, say around 2012, because I think actually they discontinued this in 2014 model year, whatever, this engine. But if you're looking at a 2012 Suburban, that was a $45,000, $50,000 vehicle. That could very much still be in use right now.
Oh, yeah.
And when you look at a lot of these types of vehicles potentially being used as work trucks, and all of a sudden you got engine problems coming way prematurely, that's a huge deal. And what really, again, gets me mad with this one is where's the NHTSA in this? Oh. Why aren't they involved here? Why does it take a jury in a federal court to make headlines about this?
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. This is something that they knew about from day one almost with this engine. For 4 years it went on. Now you've got the proof that they actually were hiding this defect. You give these people, 38,000 people in this class action suit, they sold more Suburbans and Silverado 1500s in one model year than that. Give me a break. I mean, this is just the definition of no teeth. And GM is going to look at this. They'll take their lump. They'll have to deal with a bad headline for a couple of weeks. Now, to Anna's point, you would hope the consumer out there is going to look at this and make some different decisions based on sort of a flawed operational tactic that GM took. But you know what? Silverado is the second leading vehicle in sales for like the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not happening maybe at the rate you would want potentially, or at least want so that General Motors changes the way that they're doing things. This settlement isn't going to do it until there's something more that actually forces their hand a little bit. And it's not just General Motors, it's all of these companies. We get kind of a negative perception of a lot of these class action lawsuits because people are just, chasing, the emergency chase, the whatever you want to call it, the emergency chasing
ambulance
lawyers.
Chasers. Yeah. No, everyone thinks everyone's suing people over hot coffee.
Right. Yeah. And you get in a situation like this, if this didn't happen, there would be no accountability for GM here. Now, I realize we're going back 8 years, but again, if you were somebody who bought a Silverado, who bought a Yukon for business purposes, and you get stuck with this, I'd be really pissed off. And that $2,700 does nothing for me.
No, also not just business purposes. Like a vehicle purchase is a huge investment for pretty much 98% of families in the United States.
Right.
And if you buy a lemon, that can have very severe consequences on your quality of life. GM said in a statement that it did not believe the verdict was supported by the evidence and plans to appeal. And I just thought GM really had a chance to be like, I mean, we all understand how product development works, right?
Yeah.
Like we talked about it earlier, how sometimes it just doesn't work out. Sometimes there is a flaw in the design. Sometimes you just got to cop to that and make it right. Like, hey.
Yeah, like we gave it a shot and we didn't get it right. And
You're like, okay, we tried the LC9. It turned out to be a lemon. We tried to make it right by everyone that had one, and we've moved on from that. But instead, we get them saying like, no, this wasn't the right verdict. We're going to fight it. We're not wrong. And I think their reputation suffers as a result.
Well, especially when there's a part of this, and this is from Auto Evolution's website, where in 2010, they told their dealers that to help remedy this situation, to clean the pistons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eric, you're a car guy. How long would it take to clean an engine's pistons? Yeah.
According to
like
producer
half a
Eric,
day.
it's a timely procedure.
I mean, that's 2010. They knew something was wrong. Again, I don't know. This is a head shaker for me.
Well, this is also something that maybe initially they thought they could kick the can and find a fix that was maybe a little beyond cleaning the pistons. But at some point, they just got to realize like, all right, we've got to do something about this.
Yeah.
So to your points then, and maybe this is in contrast to what I was trying to say before, but if Silverado and Sierra and stuff, Yukons are still selling like crazy, did this in any way impact those brands? Because it sounds like it didn't.
No, because, I think because I think there's when things like this happen, they do a good job of blaming the engine and not the brand.
Yeah, I'd agree. They can say that was 8 years ago. We switched. We
don't use that engine anymore. So and people just they're over it.
No, part of the responsibility and commitment that we have to the Silverado brand is that we're always going to do right by our customers and give them the best engine possible. That's why we cleaned house, got the LC9 out of here, and we got a brand new Chevy Silverado out there for you for the low price of $250,000. All right. Well, before we move on to In Case You Missed It, the stories that maybe weren't as popular on our websites, but still stand to make a big impact on the industry going forward, we have another word from our sponsor.
Oil Eater's household cleaners, industrial cleaners, and industrial equipment are specifically designed to replace dangerous solvents and are used throughout the world. Our safe, water-based formula dissolves grease and grime for almost any surface and leaves a fresh, non-chemical scent. Our ultra-concentrated formulas are perfect for light, medium, or heavy cleaning and can be used on shop floors, in parts washers, to clean equipment, and more. VOC compliant, Oil Eater will do an excellent job in a multitude of applications, safely and cost-effectively, while reducing your chemical usage. Safe for the user, safe for the surfaces being cleaned, and safe for the environment. For more information, visit oileater.com or call 800-528-0334.
And we're back. And so is Oil Eater. Oil Eater's back too, and you can get a free sample if you click the link below in the live chat or in the below the post here. We'll make sure to have that posted in the post. Could I say post one more time? Also, thanks to Jesse and Seth and Mark for hanging out in that live chat. I like the chatter. We like the chatter. All right. In case you missed it, the stories, maybe not so popular, but Anna, what do you have for us this week?
All right. So the story I selected this week was, I just could not leave it out of the podcast after how much we've talked about this specific issue before, but the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, or IIHS, just released the results of a study that it did on partially automated driving systems, and it surveyed users of those systems. And the results revealed that drivers were, as expected, more likely to engage in non-driving activities while using semi-autonomous features. So that includes like texting and eating. But they spoke specifically about certain types of semi-autonomous systems, including Tesla's Autopilot, and found that 42% of surveyed Autopilot users said that they were comfortable treating their vehicles as fully self-driving. Worse yet, 53% of Cadillac Super Cruise users said the same. So IIHS said that most of today's partially automated systems are offering things as basic as lane centering and adaptive cruise control. None of them are capable of replacing human drivers, as we know. Overall, the agency said that early adopters seem to have a poor understanding of the technology's limits, and they believe that system design and marketing are adding to these misconceptions. This is something that's
important.
Yeah, we've been talking about this a lot, right, with Autopilot. So that's why I selected the story. Obviously, it just really validates what we've been saying for a long time. These systems are kind of being mismarketed, and the way that they're being used is irresponsible, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But secondly, I was very surprised to see Cadillac Super Cruise users are even more negligent than Autopilot users. That was really scary. We've talked a lot about the Autopilot name being a problem, and I do think that it is, but clearly the study suggests that it's much more than that.
Yeah.
I think GM is pretty freewheeling with its marketing of Super Cruise. It calls it, quote, the world's first true hands-free driving system for the freeway.
Huh.
Oof.
Right. But what's strange is that the GM crash rate with its level 2 autonomous system is much lower than Tesla's. I wonder if that has to do with the differences in the system. So Autopilot requires you to keep a hand on the wheel, which is something we found pretty easy to trick.
Bypass?
Yeah, people have found ways to kind of cheat that system. Whereas Super Cruise uses a system that tracks your eye movements to determine whether you're paying attention. So maybe that's the big difference. I don't know. But I thought it was interesting because obviously we've been seeing this already, but also just the fact that maybe the name, it's more than just this name. Mm-hmm. People have actual, there's misperceptions across these different brands, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know, maybe the eye thing is what Tesla needs to do because, Tesla's Autopilot vehicles are crashing at a much higher rate than Super Cruise.
Is it because the Cadillac traditionally has an older customer.
And you just think they're more responsible?
No, aren't they? Well, because you said that more of them think that they have fully autonomous vehicles.
Right, but they're crashing less. But that's true, yeah.
I was...
because they don't understand the terminology?
Yeah. I don't know, not because they don't understand the terminology, but, maybe, I don't know who to put this on. Like, maybe it's on the salesperson at some point that says, like, yeah, no, Super Cruise, hands off.
Well, I think part of it, regardless of how the salesperson is describing it or detailing it, the fact that they're talking about it probably helps. Remember, when you get a Tesla, it's delivered to your door, or you go pick it up at a service center or whatever. Whereas, and I know you had a different experience, but when we got a new vehicle, like the salesperson went through all the features and all the different stuff that was on there. And I think just taking that due diligence can definitely present something like that type of feature in a much different light and understanding it better.
Yeah.
You need a dealership.
I think so. In this instance, I think it's helping.
Well, because we've talked about that previously, where if you don't have a dealership, like maybe, not like an online tutorial, but there needs to be something where somebody basically in person runs down the features and capabilities of your car as like maybe a second stopgap. Yeah,
especially when it relates to safety like this one so does.
Yeah. Did you see this come across the wire and just be like, yes, we knew it.
I knew it. Vindicated.
Oh, yeah.
I did. I told Jeff about it right away.
Look at these stats.
Get this, Jeff.
Oh, man.
That's how I talk to Jeff. Get this, Jeff.
You're right, Anna. You're right.
Right? That was before the first cup of coffee, I guess. It was an early morning.
Before she lost total confidence in everything you say.
Ooh, some hard truths today. Jeff, what's your in case you missed it?
All right, I picked a story here, and this one goes back almost exactly a week. It was a story we ran on the former the former Uber security chief being found guilty of data breach cover-up. So we're looking at a federal jury in San Francisco convicted Joseph Sullivan of obstructing justice and concealing knowledge that a federal felony had been committed. And basically, this goes back to 2016 when basically Sullivan was contacted by a hacker basically saying that he had obtained a bunch of personal data of Uber drivers and users. We're talking about 57 million users and 600,000 driver's license numbers. So a ton of stuff that was hacked and obtained illegally. Basically, Sullivan didn't tell anybody. Didn't report it internally, so it could be reflected on SEC filings. We were just talking about that. Covered it up, basically paid the hackers $100,000 and told them to sign an NDA, which, hackers, of course, are going to sign an NDA and totally honor that. That should never be an issue.
They sign their real names on it?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm sure they were very creative with that. But eventually, obviously, this guy was found out and he's been convicted. He could face up to 8 years in jail.
Where did he get the $100,000, Jeff?
Petty cash.
Yeah, just allocated that in some way, shape, or form. He was the
Bitcoin.
chief technology officer.
Was it really?
He did, yes, he did pay in Bitcoin. So the reason I wanted to bring this story up is, number one, it shows something you shouldn't do, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of bleeds into a lot of things that are going on in the industrial sector. I've talked a lot about cybersecurity. We do the security breach program, but one of the things that's going on right now is a movement that puts it out there that manufacturers and really anybody needs to be more transparent when they are hacked. Mm-hmm. They need to report this stuff. They need to go to the Department of Justice, to Homeland Security. That's the department that handles this, and let them know what's going on, especially if it's a ransomware attack. Now, part of President Biden's $1.5 billion government funding bill that was passed earlier this year had some of this, but it only applied to certain industries: infrastructure, transportation, healthcare, financial. So if you're a manufacturer who makes hardware and you're hacked, even though there's a lot of valuable data that they could be getting there about your customers, about the companies you work with, potentially shutting down your operations and ransoming you in order to get it back online, you are not obligated at this point to report it. The reason that's so important is the only way we're going to generate better defenses and become more aware of all these bad actors and what's going on there is if companies are willing to sort of swallow a little bit of pride, admit they got hacked, share the details, and try to prevent that from happening to other people, because those other people could be you again. Yeah. Because there is a high percentage of these ransomware organizations. Again, this isn't a guy sitting in grandma's basement anymore. These are highly organized organizations that are intentionally targeting certain industries and certain companies within those industries. They're going to come back at you.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we really need is a greater movement and just a greater transparency when these things do happen. Yes, it's embarrassing. Yes, you don't want to put it out there because potentially if you are publicly traded, that could generate some concerns there. But for the betterment really of not just industry specifically, but just culturally, the more information out there, the better, smarter we can be in defending against these types of attacks. So it's unfortunate for this individual that he's looking at some serious jail time here, but I think there is a lesson learned that let's be forthcoming with this stuff.
Is the system for reporting hacks, is it, I don't want to say anonymous, but can you do it with some sort of protection where you're just reporting it to DHS and they kind of don't let it out that it happened?
Well, not if you want any assistance. I mean, if you want any help in dealing with the hacker, because to say after the fact, yes, there is some benefit there, but really to get anything out of it, they need to know, well, how did they get in there? Yeah. Who are you? What were your vulnerabilities? Yeah, no, what's your type of business? Yeah, it
wouldn't be that you're anonymous, but that like there's some sort of privacy. That everything is shared with the with DHS, but to kind of keep that from leaking out into the press.
I mean, that's a fair concern. I don't know what safeguards are in place right now.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to that Colonial Pipeline hack, we all knew what was going on there and we all knew how it was resolved. So, again, bringing these guys, shining some light on what they're doing can have a lot of positive impacts.
Well, I think that, if they could shine a light on what's happening and then maybe skirt some of, what shareholders are going to think, what people will think of your brand. If you can do it with some relative anonymity to the general public, that people would be more willing to come forward.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And especially in the industrial sector, it's so weird. I was looking at some research. Something like 70% of people in the industrial sector are confident in their cyber defense. 75% claim that they've had a security issue.
Huh. Well,
how does that work?
Okay.
Well, they
learned a lot from that security issue, Jeff.
Learned everything they needed to know,
I guess.
Anna, what were your thoughts on the data breach at Uber?
I don't know, just sad to me that this guy felt the need to fall on his sword and protect this multi-million-dollar publicly traded company from embarrassment or whatever. Or maybe he felt personally that it was his responsibility. He didn't want anyone to know. But that's like, Uber was going through a lot back then. Like they were embarrassed constantly. But I don't know. It's just sad that he's going to take this jail time potentially for this when he should have just come out with it to begin with. That's not fair.
All right. In case you missed it this week, Rivian recalling nearly all of its vehicles over a loose fastener. Oh, and John's watching us live. John, how you doing? He says, IN on a Thursday? I'm all about it.
Yeah.
Me too, John. Friday's going to be an easy one. Back to Rivian. As if Rivian didn't have enough problems. Now, more quality issues. The electric truck and SUV maker is recalling nearly every vehicle it has delivered to customers. And why? To tighten a loose fastener. The fastener connecting the vehicle's front upper control arm and steering knuckle may not be torqued enough. It sounds simple, but it could affect drivers' ability to steer. It causes excessive noise, vibration, or harshness from the front suspension, or it could change steering performance or feel. The Rivian CEO, RJ Scaringe, said to call the company immediately if you're experiencing any of these things. The recall affects about 13,000 vehicles, which I thought was interesting because I guess I didn't realize Rivian had 13,000 vehicles out there yet. There have only been 7 reports of problems, but no injuries, and the fix will only take a few minutes, and the company expects to have everything fixed in about 30 days. I chose the story because it's a relatively normal hiccup for a startup. Just a problem with a component that wasn't torqued enough. Again, someone in the assembly line is just really getting an earful right now. Like, you didn't turn the wrench enough? No, or, obviously there's way more specific tools that are automated to do this process. So something wasn't calibrated right. But unlike losing $1.2 billion in tax breaks last week, relatively not bad.
Right.
And it's just Rivian is having a real rough go lately. And I just couldn't imagine that this came up and they're like, really? A fastener?
Yeah.
Done in by a nut. Jeff, what were your thoughts on Rivian's recall of its entire fleet?
Well, they kind of did the exact opposite of what we just talked about GM doing, right? They saw something right away. They were on it immediately. And I think this is sort of a short-term, long-term type of situation. Short-term, yeah, it sucks because you're finally getting things ramped up and going. Now you've got this recall of, like you said, almost every vehicle that they had out there. So, but long-term, this demonstrates to your customers the sense of reliability, quality, dedicated to putting out the right type of product for them, and that you're there for them. And it's not just once it's off the lot, it's your responsibility. So I think, again, tough period here for Rivian right now. Long term, I actually think this helps them a lot.
Yeah. It's honestly, I mean, it is, GM was seeing the same thing with it was like 3 times the amount of vehicles. And I bet that the fact that it was the engine had to play into it. I mean, whoa, it's just a fastener? Yeah, get those in here. Get those in there and get it fixed up. Anna, your thoughts on the Rivian story?
I think we should do a collection of all of the improperly or counterfeit fasteners, improperly torqued or counterfeit fasteners that we have seen take down like really, really big operations.
Oh, yeah.
Just to be like driving that point home that this tiny little thing can cause such a catastrophe. I'm really rooting for Rivian. So I agree with Jeff. Like, typically with a startup, you see this stuff. I mean, Tesla's had quality problems for how many years that they're just kind of now climbing out of. So it's normal situation. And the early adopters should kind of expect this stuff. But hopefully they'll just shake it off and move on.
No, I agree with you that we constantly see these stories where it's like, man, it was a single like a single fastener, a single screw, a bad relay or solid state relay. Those, every time I see those stories come across my desk, they surprise me. And it's just a constant reminder of how complicated some of these designs are that we kind of really take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
All right, before we get out of here this week, let's go into our final thoughts. Anna, do you have any final thoughts for people today?
Well, I just want to say that my littlest children have a big birthday this weekend, so that's exciting. Everyone's super pumped up about it. And since they're twins, they each get their own birthday cake. So I will be in a sugar coma for most of next week, probably. But I found this amazing shark cake for my son, who's like really into sharks, and there's some blood frosting on there, which I thought was sort of intense for a kid's birthday cake, but I'll let you know how that goes. I think he's going to be into it. I think he might go right for that piece.
I mean, if you want to prevent a sugar coma and bring in any leftovers, you feel free to do so.
Those would be welcome here.
Absolutely.
Those cupcakes you brought in after your son's birthday were outstanding.
Yeah. No, it's I got a little bit of a reprimand on that one when I got home. Just like, you brought him into the office already? I'm like, I thought I was doing the right thing. You don't do that until the second day after. I'm like, whoa, all right. But yeah, no, it's one of the positives of working with people with small children is that there's a kind of a constant flood of sweets coming in to get out of the house. You
got to get that. I mean, after Halloween too, I'll have to take a little off the top and get that out of there.
No, we're 2 weeks away from it being really great in the office because it's just like, I'm sorry, we have to take all the Snickers bars out of it.
It's not good for you to eat all this.
My final thought this week is just, last night we did pumpkin carving with the kids.
Nice.
And they were actually into it. It was, Carrie, who's watching live, says, those cupcakes though. See, I'm still hearing about bringing these cupcakes.
Sorry, Carrie.
My goodness. I will stop at the store and get us another 2 dozen. Which is a normal amount for 4 people. No, so we carved pumpkins last night and it was a lot of fun. The kids are starting to get to that age where they're getting into it. The last couple of years, they were a little hesitant, but the oldest dove right into it.
Yes.
And just like, he's at that stage where he's just like grabbing the guts. And, as you cut out the pieces of the big jack-o'-lantern smile in the eyes, and he's just like, look at my teeth, Dad. And we made the scary jack-o'-lantern for the old one, and we made a cat jack-o'-lantern because my youngest is just super into cats, and I threw whiskers on a pumpkin, hero dad moment. But it was a lot of fun, and we also roast the pumpkin seeds, which are delicious. And so just, make sure to take a moment for yourself and your family, carve a pumpkin, roast some seeds, and have yourself a wholesome time. John who's still with us, says, I really wish I had a cupcake. Me too, John. Me too. We'll get one after this. Go Rangers. Jeff, what's your final thought this week?
So pumpkin carving is actually one of those things. It seems to stay on longer than other holiday traditions.
Oh,
type
okay.
things.
You still
So
get to do it?
yeah, in high school, there's still like to carve the pumpkins.
That
So,
was, I mean, my wife and I, we've been carving pumpkins for a while, and just,
yeah.
it was great when the kids came on board because it's like, oh, now we get 4.
Yeah, so my closing thought is thanks for all the support. The kitchen remodel, we are finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, so we are excited. This weekend, we'll be putting our house back together, basically.
Nice.
So that'll be wonderful.
Yeah, just
Kind of, you don't realize how like discombobulated you get after a while, and you get used to it for a little bit, and then you just get really annoyed about everything and where it's located at that moment.
Oh,
So that'll bring the tension down in the household a little bit.
I mean, the kitchen will be back, but we're not going to lose the grill pizzas, right?
I'll grill you a pizza whenever you want.
That's got to be a regular. That's got to be like in the dinner rotation now.
The girls were
In
not
the
as crazy
podcast
about
rotation.
them. I loved it, but
Really?
they were not as on it. Yeah.
It's so hard to please a teenager.
Speaking of tough to please, David.
Oh, yeah.
So looking at the polling question, which of the following companies do you think is the toughest time recruiting new employees? This was from last week. The options were Amazon, Exxon, Tesla, Rivian, Hyundai, or cannabis processors. We had some cool feedback here. A couple of new commenters to the podcast. First one I'm going to get to is Kay Smith. He said if Amazon needs to treat their employees at all their facilities as if they're all unionized by having open communications from the floor all the way up to management, they would avoid having 95% of their disgruntled employee issues and also need a labor union. So kind of interesting perspective there in terms of championing how a union could probably help them. They're looking at it more adversarial. We also had Jack Harris chime in. He said, he also picked Rivian, actually. He did not. He thought Rivian was the company that had the toughest time. He said it's just that they're difficult to trust right now.
Oh,
So
okay.
maybe looking at some of the stuff we talked about in terms of their new facility, some of the other issues. We just talked about a recall. So that was where he was at. Overall, the winner of the polling question, though, was Amazon. That definitely got the most people saying that would be the most difficult one to try to recruit new employees to. Going forward, the polling question for this week, thought we'd say, again, still with some of the stuff we talked about on the podcast, which of the following would be the most difficult mistake to try to justify?
Ooh.
So if you get called on the carpet and you got to try to back up these, which one would be the toughest?
Oh.
So firing whistleblowers and being forced to pay $800,000 in lost wages, funneling millions of dollars into a failed robotics program, paying over $240 million to support production of a product that never existed. So if you're that guy in the accounting purchasing for Tyson, why do we buy $240 million and support cows that never existed?
The guy cut the check.
That'd be a tough one. Hiding a known defect that led to a $100 million class action suit, talking about GM there, covering a hack or data breach, or speccing a fastener that led to a company-wide recall. So take a look at those, see which one you think might be the toughest. Hopefully you cannot speak from experience.
Right? Like this, I like this polling question because it's who gets fired first?
Yeah. If you get caught, man, because some of these you can,
egregious.
You can get around it a little bit, but whew, that guy at Rivian with the torque spec, that could be tough.
That wouldn't, oh man, it has got to be, that could be just really interesting if we ever got any insight into that other side of the story, like what happens internally. No one would ever share that unless that person was somewhat disgruntled after they were maybe reassigned, let's say. No, good question. And I wasn't surprised that Amazon took the top there just because they talk about, needing hundreds of thousands of employees over the next couple of years, and that they just might not be there. And I mean, cannabis processors in general, there's a demand to get into that industry.
There was one comment that said he didn't want to sell weed for a living.
He didn't want to sell weed for a living.
So that's fair.
That's fair. We're not asking him to sell it. We're asking him to grind it and roll it.
There you go.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use, or just hitting the like button if you're with us live on YouTube. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Jeff, David, and Anna, or Anna at IEN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily and weekly newsletters and make sure you get the podcast delivered to your inbox first. Not going to get through the close today, guys. We're never leaving.
Nailed
Let's
it.
just start from the beginning.
Let's start over. All right, for Jeff and Anna, I'm David Manti. This is the Today in Manufacturing podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.